The Harper family farm sat on the outskirts of Miller's Hollow, a quiet town with one gas station, 2 churches, and a population that hadn't changed in 20 years. The farm was passed down through generations, cornfields stretching out like golden waves, a weather-beaten red barn, and an old windmill that squeaked in the breeze. It was the kind of place where doors were left unlocked, and the loudest noise came from the distant cry of coyotes at night. That sense of safety was part of what made what happened next so chilling. It was October 13, 2022. A cool autumn afternoon. Lucy Harper, 14, responsible and bookish, was helping her younger sister Emily, a lively 9-year-old with a love for animals, gather eggs from the chicken coop. Their mother had just finished canning peaches in the kitchen, while their father tinkered with the tractor near the shed. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary. At around 4:30 p.m., Lucy and Emily were last seen walking toward the barn laughing, chasing each other, their boots kicking up dry leaves. By 5 p.m., their mother called out for dinner. No answer. She assumed they were still playing. But as the minutes passed and the sky dimmed to gray, her calls grew louder, more desperate. Their father joined the search, thinking maybe they wandered into the woods behind the field. But the woods were silent. No rustling, no giggling, nothing but the sound of wind through the cornstalks. The girls had vanished in broad daylight, within walking distance of both parents. Without a sound or trace. Panic turned into dread as night fell. Flashlights cut through the darkness. Neighbors showed up. Police were called. Search dogs were brought in, but the trail went cold less than 10 feet from the barn. It was like the girls had stepped into a black hole. No torn clothing, no scuff marks, not even a dropped hair clip. The barn was empty, save for a broken lantern and the distant creak of rope swinging from the hayloft. The search extended for days. Helicopters scanned the fields. Volunteers combed through every inch of farmland. The creek was dragged. Wells were searched. Not even a shoelace turned up. But the strangest part, and what many of the searchers still talk about, was the eerie silence around the farm in the hours after the girls disappeared. The birds had stopped singing. The chickens huddled quietly in one corner. Even the family dog, usually energetic and protective, refused to go near the barn, tail between its legs, trembling. Something about that place, on that day, had changed, and no one could explain why. 1 week after Lucy and Emily vanished, as the community was still reeling from the shock, something unexpected surfaced, not from the fields, the woods, or the creek, but from within the very walls of the farmhouse. Lucy's bedroom remained untouched since the night she disappeared. Her favorite blanket was still folded neatly on the bed. A stack of books sat on her nightstand, bookmarked halfway through a mystery novel. It was during one of her mother's painful return visits to the room, searching for comfort or maybe answers, that she found it. Tucked just beneath Lucy's pillow, almost invisible, was a small, crumpled piece of paper. The handwriting was unmistakably Lucy's, her neat but slightly slanted cursive, written in blue ink. The note contained only one sentence, but it chilled the room to the bone. He watches from the trees. Don't tell Mom. No date, no context, just those 9 words, scribbled hurriedly, with a single word watches underlined 3 times. The note was rushed to investigators. Forensics tested it for fingerprints, but only Lucy's were found. The ink was fresh, meaning it had been written just days, maybe even hours, before she vanished. The placement of the note, under her pillow, raised disturbing questions. Was Lucy trying to protect her sister? Had she sensed something was wrong before it happened? And worst of all, was someone really watching them from the woods all along? Local law enforcement hesitated to give the note much weight. To them, it read like a child's overactive imagination, maybe inspired by one of the horror stories Lucy loved to read. But her parents knew better. Lucy wasn't the type to scare easily. She didn't lie, and she certainly wouldn't hide something serious, unless she truly believed it was dangerous to speak out loud. Her mother later confessed she remembered Lucy acting strangely in the days leading up to the disappearance, locking her window at night, jumping at sudden noises, and once asking if their security cameras still worked, even though they hadn't used them in years. The note also reignited an old town rumor, one that had always been dismissed as folklore. For decades, there were whispers about a figure known only as the Watcher, an unseen presence said to live deep in the tree line beyond the Harper farm. Teens would dare each other to walk into the woods at night. Some came out laughing, others came out quiet, pale, Lucy's note was the first written confirmation that maybe, just maybe, the stories weren't just stories. And whatever truth it held, the timing was undeniable. The note appeared days before the girls vanished, and no one had seen or heard from them since, as weeks bled into months. The once vibrant search for Lucy and Emily Harper lost its fire. The helicopters stopped flying. The news crews left town. The volunteers stopped knocking on doors. Tips became fewer, and hope slowly faded into background noise. The Harper farm, once the heart of a tight-knit rural community, became a haunted symbol, a reminder of something too painful to name. The barn stood silent. The fields grew over. Even the birds seemed to avoid the place. The official investigation began to stall. Every lead fizzled out. Surveillance footage from nearby roads showed nothing. No cars. No strangers. No signs of a struggle? The creek turned up no evidence. The woods, thoroughly swept, revealed no clothing, no blood, no remains. Investigators began suggesting theories that made the family sick, that the girls had run away, that they'd become lost and succumbed to the elements, or even worse, that someone within the family had been involved. But there was no proof, just speculation and silence. By spring of the following year, the case was reclassified from active search to cold file. It sat in a drawer in the Miller County Sheriff's Office, labeled only by a number and a worn photograph of two smiling sisters. The detectives who once worked around the clock moved on to other cases. The town, slowly and uneasily, returned to routine. The children at school stopped asking questions. The flyers were removed from telephone poles, now weathered and stained. From months of rain and snow, the Harpers couldn't bear it. Their home had become a place of unbearable memories. Lucy's shoes still sat by the front door. Emily's favorite stuffed rabbit was still in her bed, untouched. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every knock at the door felt like a possibility, and every time, it wasn't. 6 months after the girls vanished, the Harpers sold the farm and moved out of Miller's Hollow. They didn't hold a funeral. There were no goodbyes, just boxers, silence, and an aching hole that no one dared speak about in public. But even as the case faded from headlines, a strange sense of unease settled over those who had been part of the search. Several volunteers privately admitted to having unsettling dreams after scouring the Harper property, of laughter echoing through the woods, of masked figures standing just out of sight, or of walking into the barn and seeing movement from the shadows above. Of course, no one reported these dreams officially. They were dismissed as stress, imagination, trauma. Still, the feeling lingered that something was left behind. Something important. Something deliberately hidden. Nearly 3 years had passed since Lucy and Emily Harper vanished, and the farm had long since been abandoned. Vines crept up the rotting porch, shingles peeled off the roof like curling leaves, and the barn's red paint had faded to a cracked, ghostly pink. The property, left unsold and unclaimed, became a quiet void on the edge of Miller's Hollow, too painful for the townspeople to visit, too eerie for trespassers. That is, until a young urban explorer, known online as Shad Zero W. Walker, decided to cross the fence. Shad Zero W. Walker, whose real name was Aaron Keller, had built a following online exploring abandoned buildings across the Midwest. His videos were moody, full of static and jump cuts, always narrated in a soft, curious voice. But this time, something felt different. The day he filmed at the Harper farm, the air seemed heavier. His audio crackled more than usual. His equipment glitched strangely whenever he neared the barn. Still, the location was irresistible, a real-life missing persons case tied to a decaying farmhouse no one had entered in years. The footage began innocently enough. Dust dancing in sunlight through broken windows. Childhood toys left to rot. In corners, the old piano in the living room, one key still echoing when pressed. But as he moved toward Lucy and Emily's shared bedroom, the tone shifted. The camera caught glimpses of something odd. The bed was slightly made, despite the house being abandoned. A hairbrush sat on the dresser, with long, blonde strands still caught in its bristles. It was as if someone had been there, not years ago, but recently. That came the barn. Aaron entered slowly, narrating the creaking of the wooden boards and the distant rustle of leaves in the rafters. He scanned the loft, panned the camera across tools long rusted, and finally stopped at something hanging on the far wall. A child's drawing. Still colorful, unfaded by time. Taped neatly, it showed 2 stick figures with pigtails, one taller, one shorter, standing beside a towering figure drawn in black crayon. its head misshapen like antlers or branches. Beneath it, in shaky handwriting, "We're still here." Aaron froze. His breathing grew shallow on the mic. "This wasn't here before," he whispered. He turned to leave, and the video ended abruptly. New sign-off, new outro music, just static. The video uploaded the next day and quickly went viral. Viewers flooded the comments with speculation. Some said the drawing was planted. Others were convinced it was real. A few noticed something Aaron hadn't. In the final frame, just before the video cuts out, something moves in the upper rafters of the barn, a dark silhouette shifting ever so slightly. 1 week after the eerie barn video went viral, a pair of local teens, Josh Palmer and Dylan Reeves, decided to do some magnet fishing near the Harper property. It was meant to be just another weekend adventure for their small YouTube channel. The creek behind the old farm had always had a creepy reputation, but thanks to the sudden spike in online interest, it had become a magnet in itself, for ghost hunters, thrill seekers, and now 2 boys with a GoPro and a heavy-duty neodymium magnet tied to pair. It was a cloudy afternoon, with wind whistling through the tall trees lining the creek. The boys tossed the magnet into the water again and again, pulling up the usual junk: nails, bottle caps, a rusted horseshoe. They joked and narrated their finds until Josh's magnet suddenly caught on something solid, too solid. It didn't rattle like scrap metal. It didn't move freely. It resisted. After minutes of tugging and circling, they pulled up what looked like a heavy, moss-covered metal box, sealed shut with thick hinges and a rusted latch. There was something ominous about its weight. It felt intentional. The box had no locks, just a latch secured with a corroded pin. With trembling hands, and their camera still rolling, the boys pried it open on a rock beside the creek. Inside, cushioned in layers of deteriorated cloth, was a single small red shoe, dirty, worn, but unmistakably a child's. There was a faded sticker of a cartoon bunny on the side. Josh stared in silence. He had grown up in Miller's Hollow. He remembered the posters. He remembered that exact shoe from the photos. It had belonged to Emily Harper. But that wasn't all. Beneath the shoe was an old Polaroid photograph, warped slightly from moisture but still visible. It showed 2 young girls sitting on what looked like a concrete floor. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow and sunken. Lucy had her arm around Emily, as if trying to shield her. And behind them, barely in frame, stood a tall man in a crude deer mask, his head tilted sideways like a predator studying prey. The photo looked recent. It wasn't yellowed with age. There was no time stamp, no writing. Just that disturbing silence captured forever in a single flash. The teens rushed home and gave the box to the police. Forensic teams immediately took over. The shoe was positively identified as Emily's, the same one she had been wearing the day she disappeared. The photograph, despite being soaked, was intact enough to scan and analyze. Investigators were stunned. Not only were the girls clearly alive after the disappearance, they had been somewhere nearby. The creek where the box was found was just 300 yards from the barn, which begged a terrifying question. How had it been missed for nearly 3 years, and who placed the box in the water? And why now? The discovery of Emily's shoe and the chilling Polaroid forced the investigation into overdrive. For the first time in years, authorities returned to the Harper property, not with the tired resignation of a cold case unit, but with urgency, armed with ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and a sense that something had been missed. And they were right. Beneath the aging boards of the barn, under a forgotten pile of firewood and hay, they found it, a large concrete slab, slightly off level, with metal loops bolted to each side, like it was meant to be lifted. But not ice. It took 3 men and a crowbar to pry it open. Beneath was a narrow staircase, steep and damp, descending into darkness. The air that wafted out was stale, heavy with the scent of rust and mold. A bunker unseen for years, buried just beneath. The feet of search teams, family and friends who had walked that barn countless times. The walls were lined with old insulation boards, now peeling and rotting. There was no light switch. Investigators entered with flashlights, beams cutting through the darkness like knives. Inside was a nightmare frozen in time. On the far side of the room were 2 small mattresses, makeshift beds laid out on wooden pallets. Next to them, stacks of children's books, their covers torn and stained. A plastic bin held empty food wrappers, juice boxes, and a few cracked toys. On the concrete walls, drawn in crayon, were more pictures: suns, stars, a house, 2 girls. One image, repeated several times, showed a figure with antlers or branches for a head, the same creature from the Polaroid. The same figure from the barn drawing. But the most disturbing discovery wasn't what was in the room, it was what had been done to it. Metal loops had been bolted into the walls near the beds, each one attached to a broken chain. The lengths were short, no more than 4 feet. It was clear. This wasn't a shelter. It was a cell. Scratches marked the concrete floor and lower parts of the walls. Desperate, jagged. Someone, likely both girls, had tried to claw their way out. But whoever had kept them there had thought of everything. The bunker was soundproofed with thick padding. No screams would have made it through. And yet, the room was empty. No girls, no captor, no bodies, just remnants. Cold, hollow signs of a disturbing past and a hasty departure. Dust on the floor showed a single set of footprints leading toward the back wall, where another exit had once been sealed with bricks. Freshly cracked mortars suggested it had been opened recently. Someone had been here, possibly watching, waiting, right under the feet of those searching for clues. And just like that, the terrifying realization dawned. The girls may have survived. For a time, but they weren't the only ones who had lived in the dark. The discovery of the bunker lit a fire under the investigation. But it also raised new and far more terrifying questions, namely, who had built it, who had used it, and most of all, where had he gone? The crude drawings, the restraints, and the photo of the masked figure pointed to one person, a man who had stalked, captured, and held 2 girls just beneath the surface of a seemingly innocent farm. But he hadn't left behind a name. No fingerprints. No DNA. It was like he'd never existed at all. Just a shadow that moved through the trees and vanished into the dark. Then came the sightings. Not many, but enough to rattle the town. A hunter in the woods claimed he saw a tall man in tattered clothing moving silently between the trees. A strange mask covering his face, bone white, with long stick-like antlers protruding from the top. A local woman reported someone standing at the edge of her property line, at dusk, unmoving, watching her house for nearly 20 minutes before slipping away. In each account, the figure never approached, never spoke. But the air around him was described the same way. Wrong, heavy, unnatural, like he brought something with him. Something cold. Police chalked it up to hysteria, a psychological ripple effect caused by the resurgence of a horrific case, but deep down, many weren't convinced. The detail that disturbed investigators most came from a gas station's security tape found 40 miles away. 2 weeks after the bunker was found. The footage was grainy. Filmed at 3:17 a.m., a tall figure in a long coat stood outside the store, unmoving, for over 6 minutes. He never entered. He simply stared at the door, his head slightly tilted. In a single frame, as headlights passed, a glint revealed the unmistakable curve of antlers. The man was never identified. No one saw where he came from or where he went. But what made the footage more unsettling was what detectives noticed after enhancing the video. Behind the masked figure, standing half in shadow just by the edge of the store's wall, was a second figure, much smaller, barefoot, thin, wearing what looked like a torn child's dress. The face was never fully visible, just the pale glimmer of skin and long unkempt hair. But to the trained eyes of the investigators, one thing was clear: the man hadn't been alone. After that night, the sightings stopped. No more masked figures in the woods. No more strange symbols. But in Miller's Hollow, silence wasn't peace, it was dread. It meant he was hiding again, waiting, and it left the one final unanswered question hanging in the air, the one that haunted every detective, every volunteer, every family member who had held out hope. If the masked man had been seen with one of the girls, what happened to the other? To this day, no one knows exactly how long Lucy and Emily were kept in that hidden bunker, or how close. Rescue may have come before they vanished again. No arrests have been made. No suspects confirmed. The man in the mask, if he ever really existed, left no footprints, no voice, no name. Just shadows in the trees. And a story that refuses to die. The Harper farm remains abandoned. Nature is reclaiming it inch by inch, but the barn still stands. The door still swings in the wind. And beneath the floorboards, the darkness waits, undisturbed. Some say on quiet nights, if you stand near the edge of the creek, you can still hear laughter, soft, distant, and wrong. Others say it's just the wind. But most locals, they don't go near it at all. Authorities quietly closed the file again, calling it unresolved but inactive. Too many questions, not enough answers. But people online haven't forgotten. The Polaroid, the drawings, the girl in the gas station tape, the box in the creek, clues scattered like breadcrumbs, daring someone to piece them together. And with every year that passes, a chilling thought grows harder to ignore. What if he's still out there? What if they are? And what if, one day, a new box floats to the surface, with only one shoe inside? Until then, the creek runs cold, and the woods. They watch.